So we're going to look at joints now. So what is a joint? It's a point of contact between either bone and bone or bone and cartilage. So we have this word called a joint. What are joints? They're places of contact between bone. What is up with this pen? Bone and bone, or bone. Bone and cartilage. So joints occur at these areas of articulation. So we'll talk about articulation, this movement that occurs. I gotta get over it. Articulation, guys. So any movement that results in the change of the position of a bone occurs at an articulation. So it comes from this Latin word articulare, which means to join together or to come together. So a joint, to join together. That's the way I think of it. All right, so we're going to look at these two classifications, a functional classification of a joint and a structural classification of a joint. So a functional classification of a joint, what we're asking is basically, for functional, is how much movement occurs at these joints. So I'll write some stuff up and then we'll come back. So these are our three functional classifications of joints. We have synarthoses, amphiarthoses, and diathroses. So a synarthrosis is considered an immovable joint. So the closer the two bones are, when they get almost touching, so an example there, I'm looking at slide 4 of his slides, so these sutures, these connections. We just looked at fontanelles a couple slides back. These fontanelles, once they close, they have these joints between the two bones, not like pretty much no space between them, right? We have this bone, tiny bit of connective tissue, and then this bone. So there's not a lot of movement. There's not movement at all. And as you increase the strength of a joint, keep this in mind. As you increase the strength, you will decrease the movement. So these synarthoses, whoops, my bad. Let's go back to this. Increase strength, decrease movement. So these synarthoses, if they're really immovable, if they're really low in movement, then these are really high in strength. And that makes sense, right? We don't want things to be able to move our skull bones around because we have our brain underneath that. So that's our synarthoses for functional. Next is an amphiarthoses. So this is slightly movable. Again, very slightly movable, really not much movement. Slightly more movement than our synarthoses. And an example of this is our pubic symphysis. Symphysis. If we go back to, let's see, here's our os coxae. So right here we can identify our pubic symphysis, the thing that's connecting these two. So we really don't have a lot of movement here. One thing that does create movement at this symphysis is pregnancy. So if you have your uterus up here with a baby growing inside of it, or the womb, whatever you want to call it, that's putting all this downward pressure here. That's going to make this joint a little bit more movable. So you'll see pregnant woman waddling. And this is because we're starting to get a little increase of movement. Waddle during pregnancy. Okay, this last one is diathroses, also called freely movable. He calls these highly movable instead, and we'll talk about why they're not completely freely movable. All right, so functional classification. If the question asks in the STEM something about movement, joints close together, movement, I know I said movement twice, but really that's what we're classifying these as based on their movement. Then we want to look at structural classification. So let me write some stuff up. All right, so for structural classifications, we want to ask two questions. When we looked at functional classification, we asked one question, and that was the amount of movement. So is movement free? For structural classifications, we want to ask two questions. One, what type of connective tissue is present? The other question is there a presence or absence of a joint cavity? A joint cavity is a space between these two bones. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial are. Then I'll give examples of fibrous and cartilaginous. And then we'll do a whole little section on synovial membranes, or synovial joints. Okay, so fibrous, these do not, so I'm going to put CT. If you had to guess what kind of connective tissue, remember you have 4 classes of connective tissue: bone, blood, cartilage, connective tissue proper. Then you can break all those up. If you go back to our tissues lecture, you can review that. So, what connective tissue makes up a fibrous joint? Maybe fibrous connective tissue. And actually, I'm not going to say anything else about that right now. So, fibrous connective tissue made of fibrous connective tissue, and it does not have a joint cavity. So I'll just put JC. No. Most fibrous, again, most fibrous, not all fibrous, but most are synarthrotic. So that's a functional classification that we're doing now. So whenever the question, when he poses a question, you need to ask yourself, is it talking about structure or function? So the things you need to look for function, is it talking about the movement at a joint? If you're talking about structure, is it asking about connective tissue? Is it asking about presence of a joint cavity? And that's how you'll know whether the question's asking fibrous or structural. Okay, cartilaginous, CT. Remember, 4 classes of connective tissue: bone, blood, cartilage, connective tissue proper. So a cartilaginous is going to have cartilage. Sweet. Sorry, I'm catching up on my lecture. Okay. These don't have a joint cavity. No. So before synovial, because we're going to spend time on that. Okay, so before synovial, let's do some examples of fibrous and cartilaginous. So we do fibrous examples. This first one that we've already seen, this one's called a suture. So these are these fusions of these skull bones. So like the fusion of the frontal bone with the parietal bone, the fusion of the parietal with the parietal bone. Those are the examples he used on his slide. So a fibrous example, one of these is called a suture. These are in the skull bones. So a fontanelle will fuse into a joint, and that joint is called a suture. This next one is called a syndesmosis. So syndesmosis. I'm going to rewrite that because I don't want you guys, I can't even read that. So it's SYNDESMOSE. Syndesmosis. Okay. What is this? What is this connection? So this has a connection, sorry, changing color. This has a connection of a ligament. So a ligament is composed of connective tissue. I don't have anything. Let me make sure. Yeah, so I don't have the exact connective tissue that's in a suture. I'm guessing, this is just a guess, but most of the time when we talk about fibrous connective tissue, we talk about dense irregular connective tissue. So that's just a guess. But when we look at these syndesmosis, we're not looking at sutures, we're looking at syndesmosis. These have ligaments. And an example of this is the ankle. So there's a little tiny bit of movement, little tiny bit of space. So if we go back to this, we saw that most fibrous, and remember I said most fibrous are synarthrotic. Well, what does synarthrotic mean? Synarthrotic means that you can't move. So this syndesmosis is an example of a fibrous joint that has a little bit of movement. Why? Because instead, let's do bone as blue. So if this was my bone portion 1 and this is bone portion 2, in that suture I had this fibrous connective tissue going between it like this. With a ligament attaches bone to bone, but instead this time we have a bone and we have a bone, and instead of fibrous connective tissue in between, we have this fibrous connective tissue, this ligamentous attachment. And these bones, this is just the head of the bone or whatever. So if it's like that, these bones go like this. Maybe we're calling these an epiphyse. So these ligaments are these connections like that. An example is this ankle. All right, next is the gomphoses or gomphosis. So this is a peg and socket joint that your teeth go into. It connects the tooth with the jawbone. So if I have, I'll draw a picture in a sec. So we have 3. I have no idea where this word comes from because I've never seen any other word like it. So gomphosis, this is a peg and socket joint. If you were a kid and you might have had one of those squares with your name on it, my name's Liam. Nice to meet you. So you used to be able to put those blocks in, right? So you can think of this as a socket, and then you put that blue block in, and that's your peg. Okay, so this is a peg and socket joint. So if I draw my gum line, here's my gum, and deep to that gum I have my maxilla, so this bone up here, right? If this is my face, I know that I have teeth coming like this. So I have this maxilla, and then I have this mandible down here with teeth like that. So what I'm looking at in his picture is this connection to this upper facial bone, or this upper jawbone. So, whoops. All right, so gomphosis, I have that line there, and I have these sockets. Socket, 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 socket. Let's put a peg in there. Let's do purple for a tooth. And then I have this. Tooth, tooth, tooth. So these gomphoses are these joints right here. So it's this connection between our jawbone and our teeth. Peg and socket joint. All right, some cartilaginous that we're looking at. So this first one, so remember, these were all fibrous that we just did. Now we're looking at cartilaginous, so connecting our bones by cartilage. I'll write some stuff up. Okay, so 2 examples of these cartilaginous joints. One of them is this synarthoses. So syn, when you think of synergy or synergistic, this is like putting something together. So I think of syn as like together. Let me see. Give me 2 seconds. Let me look up what that actual root means. Okay, cool. Syn comes from the Greek where it has the meaning with or together. So this example right here, if you think of something like a synonym, right, or to synchronize something, you want a synonym is a word that can be put together with another word where they mean the same thing, or if you synchronize something like synchronized swimming or synchronized dancing, you guys are doing these things together to perform this dance or whatever, just an example. So these synchondroses, syn, together, chondro, that's our root for cartilage, so that's just to get your mind starting to think about this stuff, connecting bones together via cartilage. What kind of cartilage do we have here? This one we've been talking about a lot lately, hyaline cartilage. Where's an example of where we'll see this? In the ribs. We'll see some of that. And he has this one, the first rib in the manubrium. Okay. And then symphyses. So where did we just see symphyses? We saw it in these amphiarthrotic joints, which was a functional classification. But now that we're going to structural classification, we're going to cartilaginous. And then even further in cartilaginous, we're going to a symphysis. So again, he can ask this in any way, right? He might have the options of symphysis and amphiarthrosis in one place, but depending on if the question's asking about movement or what it's made of will dictate your answer. So there might be 2 right answers in the question or in the options, but only one of them is right because the question stem gives insight into what you're looking for. So just a little tip for the test. Another big thing for the test, don't read through the question and say, oh, I know what this is talking about, and then go straight to the answers and look for it. What I would recommend you do is read the question once, read it again to make sure that you're not missing words like not, or other than, or exception, or like you want these defining words, right? It's like which of these is not a fibrocartilaginous joint or whatever, you know what I'm saying. So you want to look for those key indicator words. So read the question twice. Try to answer the question yourself before you look at those options. So if it's an example, which of these are not a cartilaginous joints, and you see synchondroses, symphysis, and then you see suture and syndesmosomes. Well, your brain should automatically go, okay, which of these are cartilaginous, and then start naming them. So you want to answer them in your head first. See if you can produce that answer. If your answer is one of the test choices, it's typically right. Don't automatically say, oh, it's right there, I know what it is. But, yeah. So just some tips for the test. So this symphysis, what is it made of? Because that's what we're looking, right? We want to see what kind of cartilage it's made of. This one is made of fibrocartilage. Where did we see this? We saw this pubic symphysis. All right, let's get into synovial joints.